Now, first, I'm just going to ask that everybody, I think, click their permission that the reading be recorded. We're recording it for Joe O'Connor's widow, and possibly just personal use for Meg to send it around to people who can't be here. Okay, I think we're good to go with that. I'll get started as soon as I believe. So Mallory is going to be the one taking over the chat. So thank you, Mallory, for hosting the Zoom for us and for keeping track of comments and participants coming in. The format of this reading is going to be, I will very briefly introduce Meg and give you some context about this series and this book. And then we will have Meg Matich read from the book, and then we'll have a Q&A. I know I have some students here who are eager to ask Meg directly, sort of in person, some questions about the book. We've been reading it in my poetry class this semester, and we read it in the small press publishing class last semester. So lots of readers at St. Vincent who are excited to meet you and to ask you some questions about your process and your poetry. So feel free to use the chat feature throughout the event. If you have a question, we certainly, we'll be using it for questions during the Q&A, but I'm sure Mallory will be posting links to things. If you have any questions about anything that comes up or would like a link or more information, please just use the chat feature freely. I'm looking through the list of participants, and it's wonderful to see your names. It's a great mixture of just readers of translation, translators, friends of the press, students. So I'm really happy to have you all together in this space. I know we all have a lot of competing online interests these days. So initially we had planned to have this event in person at the library at St. Vincent, and to showcase some other handmade books and book art that students did in the small press publishing class, which is the class that produced this book. So unfortunately, because of just the status of COVID on our campus and throughout the region, we've had to default to this online format, but we're here via Pittsburgh, Latrobe, Iceland, and it seems like many, many places throughout the US and elsewhere. So it's really nice. There's something lovely about that as well, something appropriate to this work. So this chapbook inaugurates the Joe O'Connor series, which publishes a poetry chapbook by any former student of St. Vincent College or resident of our local Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania community who has not yet published a book, a full-length book of poetry. The series is named in honor of SVC alumnus Joe O'Connor, who was the class of 1965 at St. Vincent, who was my friend. And he proposed it when serving on the Humanities Council, the Advisory Council at St. Vincent. He was very involved and excited about the idea of beginning a teaching press on campus. He identified himself as the kind of student who always wished, he wrote poems all through his other classes and wished he had some kind of apparatus or idea about how to just get beyond his notebook into the world. So he had a very clear vision and a lot of excitement and enthusiasm that he brought to the early days of, opening, launching a small press at a really small rural college that mainly serves undergraduates. A year after he began advising us, he and really imagining this series, he passed away of COVID-19 in April of 2020. So this feels all the more meaningful to us. The very first small press publishing class that we made a book of his, and he took everybody out to dinner afterwards, and it was a super collaborative community, cross-generational experience. And so I think he would be very happy today to know that this is going on and that this is continuing very much according to his vision. So in keeping with Joe's vision, this series connects undergraduate students very much to the publishing process. And this chapbook was handmade by students, current students at St. Vincent College as part of the small press publishing course. Cold was selected by our editors, not only because it is a stunning series of poems with the focus of the best chapbooks, but because its poetics is profoundly touched by the processes and poetics of translation, which is what we otherwise publish. This series is really an exception to what we do at the press. The students in the small press publishing course read each poem together out loud and discussed it, and based off that conversation, how they would design the book, what it would look like, what the paper would feel like. And they wrote the following book description, which I'll read just because it was such a, one person can sit down and write a description, but this was, we had pages of notes. As Elise Wells, who is here, who was my co-professor in that class. Elise Wells is a print artist, just a visual artist and printmaker. And she was there for that process. And we had pages of notes that the students were just bringing together into this short description. So I'll use their description to tell you a little bit about the book. So Cold, the long-awaited poetic debut by translator Meg Matich, is a work of translational and responsive poetics, working from her immersion in the language and landscape of Iceland. An ecolyric of short poems tossing between spatial extremes, Cold captures the fragility of a human life in a wind-chopped home. Matich's work envelops us in the violence and tenderness of its elements: wild light, unbundled sea, hulks of ice, the larder overfull with shark meat. How might we confront the endlessness within and without ourselves? Quote, keep saying the sea will end. I know how to leave and how to stay gone, end quote. Meg Matich is an alumna of St. Vincent College. She graduated in 2011. And she's a Reykjavik-based poet and translator who's received support for her literary translation work from organizations like the DAAD, the Icelandic Literature Center, PEN, and the Fulbright Commission. And she's worked closely with UNESCO in Iceland and Ukraine. Among other projects, she's the translator of Cold Moons, 2017 Phony Media, now Deep Vellum, by Magnus Sigurðsson, and Magma 2021 by Thora Hjörleifsdóttir. Yeah. I'll read a few bits of little short excerpts from the praise that keeps coming in about this book. So Yvette Siegert said, Cold is translation in every sense. If poetry, as Matich tells us, is the birth of an island, then sign me up for this guide to a new terrain with all its lava and longing. Ruth Smith, author of Spill, wrote, Meg Matich's language in Cold comes from the, quote, sharpen edges of the air. She makes poems of raw and elemental want, scrubbed down, knowing, alive, chiseled into form. The temperature and the skill of these poems makes me gasp. And Gerther Kristni, author of Bloodhoof. I feel this way when people do this in the Spanish. I'm so sorry. How was that, Meg? How do you say her name properly?
Gerther Kristni.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
She's a prominent Icelandic author, and I don't want to butcher anybody's name. Meg Matich's lyricism is as powerful and piercing as an Icelandic blizzard. The louder the roar, the deeper the calm that follows. The same rule applies to these poems. No one should read this book without warm mittens. And finally, B.K. Fisher, author of Sieve, wrote, with wedded velocity, and that's a quote from the book, Wedded Velocity. With wedded velocity, the poems in Meg Matich's Cold transform geologic time to intimate time. They move through intuition, hesitation, perception, pause. Quote, I will make thorns, I think, from the cold, sharpened edges of the air. So without further ado, I'd love to have Meg come on and take over and read some poems from the book. And I believe there's a translation, maybe, spoiler alert, a translation coming up of one of the poems into Icelandic, which is just lovely. So after Meg is finished, there will be a Q&A. So hold on to your questions. And welcome, Meg.
Hey, thanks everyone for being here. I see Dr. Blandino clapping happily. And also some of my friends who are also Icelandic translators are on the call, which is really quite nice. Matich, I see you. Matich is Hungarian and he translates between a lot of different languages, but he actually gave me Bloodhoof, which is Gerður Kristni's book. That was the first thing he ever gave me before we were even friends. It was quite sweet. But yes, I'm very glad to be here. I really want to touch the book. I'm very excited about that. Yeah, I'd love it if you just showed it off a little bit. Everybody worked really hard, not just intellectually reading through the book and trying to understand it, but actually like physical labor, the physical pain of production went into this text. And I think that's really remarkable and special. Especially for, I don't think a lot of people get this chance for their first book. This was essentially my master's thesis when I was at Columbia. Some of the poems are newer, but it's something that I wrote while I was also translating Magnus, who we mentioned, whose book is called Cold Moons. And I only realized when I was Googling myself the other day that my book is called Cold and his is called Cold Moons. And then I realized that I stole the title sort of from him. But his poems are really, I was writing really expansive and sort of Baroque poems before I started reading him. And I mean, mimicking a lot of different styles, which is I think what you do as a young writer and also what you do as a writer in your 30s. The rhythms of his poetry just really got into my head. And I didn't realize that you could say things so simply and so plainly. And they're sort of like, I think of the language as sort of an exegesis of Icelandic when they become that small. The words get a lot bigger and they become a commentary on the nature of language itself, right? So, yeah, so now that I've said 1,000 times, I will read a small stack of poems. Yes, so this one I wrote in Icelandic. It is, approximately 10 words long, which is about what I can manage. And then I translated it into English, which is also about 10 words long, which is also about what I can manage. Hafið mótarót hringar sig utan völu sökkvér mér. The sea forms a root, wraps around my ankle, and drags me. So ominous, right? I think this is a lot of fun. I'm sorry, I'm just like really enjoying it. It's deadly silent. I don't know what to do with myself. Can people start just making signs or something? Tibrá, which means Tibrá means mirage. I just think it's a prettier word than mirage. Tibrá. Wire a geode at the mouth. The bulb will pulse systolic on a violet spectrum. Watch. the dense air pour outward, incandesce into the red smoke, fissure swarms, filaments. I want to fall asleep in the flow of a lake, a repository of rest inside the rocking motion of dreams radiating with water. Visions of cliffs crumble onto the decks of fogged-in ships that, like you, sink as they are rushing. There's something I actually forgot to mention that I wanted to say just now, which is that I dedicated the book to, thank you for the heart. I dedicated this book to Thomas Ernst, who taught at St. Vincent College, but was my, one of the most important people in my life as a young adult. And so even though he's not on this call, eventually he'll get a copy of the book and, you know how important he was. And the dedication page says, "Es gibt nichts Gutes außer man tut es," which the German speakers on the call, there are at least 2, possibly 3. Wuno means, it means actions speak louder than words, but it really literally is, there's nothing good besides what you do. And that used to hang on the door in his office, on the inside of the door. He printed it out in Times New Roman, size 14, you know, that kind of thing. 2 elks, Paleolithia. In the wet black forest, trampling the trail of ferns that sprouted from my sister's footprints. When I found you, charcoal carved your outline in the frozen lake. Sunken, soundless, had you been walking this way, I wonder, to wash what grief we held between us? So fun enough, that was a pretty sad poem, I agree. But fun enough, Magnus translated that poem into Icelandic for me a few months ago. I really liked it. I thought I had just basically rewritten that poem. So I wrote that 10 years ago, and it did not look like what it looks like now. So I'm going to read his translation. Tveir steinaldar elgir. Í blautsvörtum skóginum traðkandi stíg burknanna sem uxu upp af fótsporum systur minnar. Þegar ég fann þig, rístu víðarkól ullínar þinnar í frosnu vatninu. Á kafi og hljóð, fettaðirðu þessa slóð, spyr ég mig, til að uppmá þá sorg sem ríkti okkar milli. He translated the only complete works of Emily Dickinson into Icelandic recently. There are, one of my friends on this call could correct that if I'm wrong, but I'm hoping I'm not wrong. It was a 600-page book with his notes on it as well. Settler. Slow snow in a wind still gathers until the vision disperses, its light particles strike the brain sprites, flicker, ambering their own red networks of charge. Mundus, the mind, immersed in emerald, moths, nesting, luminous at midnight. My fissure of vision, a pinhole cave. My best friend who is on the call, one of my best friends who's on the call, she translated that into Icelandic. I'm not gonna read it, I should have asked her. But. So shout out to Gunhildur, who is in Finland. She is joining us from Helsinki. This is the next two poems I'm going to read are part of like a 7-poem series in the book called, unsurprisingly, Cold. But I'm only going to read 2 of them. Cold. Imagine the moon coated in snow, calving from its surface, avalanche to the earth, midnight to the sea. Maybe I'll read. Okay, 3 of them. Cold. Arctic fox, I have seen you flare your wings as you dive in and out of snowdrifts. You flicker, darkened and conceived obliquely. Your downy feathers stiffen with rime. You believe in the strength of the next leap. Cold. Winter's mute eye opals the ashy figure of a butcher bird. She has always been afraid of me. The man clips her talons, speaking not inaccurately of her fear of hands. I am cramped inside the thoracic cavity of a crabapple tree. The oldest wood stays each palm's wetted velocity. I will make thorns, I think, from the cold sharpened edges of the air. Glasses tree. Tenanted in my small house, I strained toward the moon's long edge, thrust into the thicket of my breaths, frozen without accuracy. Each globe contained one soul, the size of a thumb. Settlement. All that is jet stream, fleeting, build back to her, to the village that was her. Architecture of ice flow, calved from crevasses, sea blown to the coast. She went deliberately in winter. A bow strung with baleen, the driftwood barn, the strong wind. Nothing but apparition. Ice blank off distant snowpack. Paleofluvial ghosts. She did not survive herself. She did not. Fjallagras and Blodberg bury her in summer. The selvages of Iceland, her body wall. I'm done now.
Okay, thank you so much, Meg. It's okay that that was short, although I wish you'd read more. But I think one of the things that we talked about when we were making this book was how we wanted the pages to be large to sort of accentuate this feeling of silence around these poems. And so, we can do that in this reading, I guess. Though I wanted you to read all of the full poems.
Accentuate the silence around.
There's something really powerful about the sharpness of these lyrics, and something very dramatic about all they don't say, but suggest. In fact, the students spent some time printing on an etching press some ice flows that they cut out and worked into the paper. Just blind impressions of ice flows, just to kind of get at what the aesthetic of this book would be. And I still love that metaphor for what this feels. There's a lot of very dramatic spareness and compression, but there's so much that we were able to say about every one of these poems together. And so we really recognized that tension between all that was not said and all that was said. I would love to open this up. I know my students have questions. There's so much we didn't say about how we made this book, and how Meg's process in writing it, and her poetics in writing it. I would love to open it up to questions from those who have read the book or who haven't. And so please feel free to use the chat as a space to submit a question, and we will read them, and Meg can answer them. But maybe just as everybody warms up, I'll ask Meg to say a little more if I can. I'll ask the first question, which is, you did mention that you wrote these poems in part in dialogue with a book that you were translating. And this was so exciting to us at Eulalia because, we're really interested in, many of our translators are also poets, and we have a book coming up in which poet translators discuss the poetics of their translation. So this is something we think about a lot. And so it was just so fortuitous to find a book that was so, as Yvette Siegert said, translation in every sense. So this is absolutely a book of your poetry. And certainly there's no making it secondary to any other author, any other work. It's absolutely primary. But I would love you to say something a little bit about your process and how that dialogue panned out. You did mention that you were, dialoguing with style, and finding some excitement about the compression of the work you were translating, and in a new kind of form you were working in your own poems. But I would love to hear more about just what it's like to write a book while living in sort of another language, while being inside another language so intensely as translation allows us to do, or any other ways that, that this work feels translational to you, or really any ways that it might not.
I kind of want to address this in two ways. So let me write down my first thought so I don't forget it. Okay, so I was thinking about this a lot lately because I've been working on a new translation of short stories that are really intense in every sense of the word. They're from Icelandic. They're linguistically very challenging and ornate. They're very short, violent short stories. And they're also about a woman who's struggling in a lot of different ways, or they're about, a kid who loses a bird, but in a very difficult and painful way. And I started to absorb these feelings and started to play them out and started to obsess about the same things that the author was obsessing about. And then I reflected on, the last 5 years or so of my translation career, my budding translation career. And I realized it's the same thing with every single book. I just sucked it into myself. Because from beginning to end, I don't know, I'm sure that you're like this. I read every book maybe around 20 times, somewhere between 20 and 25 times by the time it's published. And so not having those voices in my head would be strange. But I did the same thing with Magnus because I was spending, 50% of my studies on translation which meant I was spending half of my time on him. And I didn't know that I could make, I think, language do the things that he could make it do. Sorry, somebody came unmuted. And so I think I started to naturally respond to that. And my impulse when I was writing became, or when I was editing rather, because my poems mainly happen in the editing phase, I started to excise text and subtract text. And then, rearrange things in the parts would just come together in that way. And I think that that's how I envisioned him working as well. And I later learned by watching him that is in fact what he also does. And then after moving away from his work a little bit, and moving away from other minimalist eco poets in Iceland, my poems got big again, or bigger relative to what they are. And, big for me is like 75 words. Those 75 words have been earned by writing, 300 and having 7 pages of material I've thrown out in the end. So that's sort of the first part of the answer. And then the second part is that in the last 2 years, I started writing in Icelandic on my own. I've been finding a lot of really strange words and latching onto them. And I discovered some of them because of my friendship with my, I don't want to call her my translator, but, that BFF.
So we have a question in the comments that came in that's very similar, I think, to the one you just answered, but kind of adds a different facet to it. So not just being a translator, but also learning Icelandic itself. There's a question that did that affect your writing in English in any ways? Learning a new language, did it allow you to think about your own writing in a different way?
I don't think it can't not. I think that I think that poetry, especially as someone who doesn't really write prose, or when I write prose, it's just a poem in a block of text. Everything about the way I thought about, even though Icelandic is an SVO language, everything that I thought about the way words could fit together changed, particularly as word order is concerned. So I think yes. And then I've been taking stabs at making my own words, making neologisms in English. But I just found it more effective in Icelandic for me. So I just have written those poems in Icelandic. But you do discover new things about yourself, certainly, as a writer.
Yeah, definitely. We have another question in the chat that was sent to me. Throughout the book, the poems reference a you that is never identified. It might not even be human. What was your thought process behind leaving this you ambiguous? And can you speak more about the address throughout the book? In addition to the you, there's also a she at times.
Yeah, they're different. I mean, they're different people. Sometimes I don't think it was ever meant to explicitly address the reader. I think it was always a person. I was writing this as sort of I had a lot of boyfriends. I was writing these to myself. So sometimes the you is me trying to find ways to comprehend my experience. At other times, it's a family member. The poem about my sister is about, essentially comes down to reclaiming, or the poem about the Alps essentially comes down to reclaiming a relationship that I lost with my sister for about 10 years. It shifts, and I'll tell you what, the last poem that I read, Settlement, initially it used to say he and his and him, and I started thinking about my choice of pronouns in particular after I went to Lviv in Ukraine for a translation residency, in 2019 in August. And we talked about retranslating classics and changing the pronouns that had been used, or choosing the correct pronouns in instances where they had been changed, and what that actually might mean for reclaiming an experience. And this is something that I think about too with Icelandic, where you have choices. Every noun has a gender. You have to choose between 3 genders when you're making they plural. They've now added a gender neutral pronoun, but so I actually changed that to she or her, because I felt so like I had lost so much power for a long time because of some negative experiences I had had. And then when I revisited this poem, you know, years after those things had happened, I could say with honesty, this is a part of me that walked off, and that that didn't survive, but became something else, right? Became literally a part of Iceland, a whole nother island. So that's who the she is. She's really, I think, probably me, and occasionally my sister.
That's wonderful, really. Yeah. We have another question here. This one's specifically in reference to the Rift poem, with the visuals of touching ash and in the experience of the power of a volcano. And Claire is curious, how were you inspired to add such a fiery phenomenon to an icy book? Do you find coldness and volcanoes connected? Is it an internal connection?
Well, just in terms of the landscape of Iceland, glaciers are on top of volcanoes. So they do coexist. They're not, I mean, they are opposite temperatures, but they're not necessarily phenomena that are free from one another. They shape one another, right? A volcano and a glacier literally shape one another. The form that a mountain will take after it's erupted is partly because of the flat shield volcanoes, I think they're called. It's because of the weight of the glacier when it was erupting through the glacier. However, this was also sort of a romanticization. I kind of romanticized, I made that word up. I kind of romanticized Iceland at that point in my life. So I was thinking about this beautiful thing that I didn't understand, that was so raw and unfamiliar, and such a fresh experience, which makes you feel so alive. And so I wrote this poem about someone who had a challenging relationship with, mainly because of, I mean, we were just very differently behaved people. And he very clearly was hesitant because I was volatile when I was younger. And so I saw myself in this phenomenon of explosion. And I realized, you know, people live at the feet of volcanoes here, and they're not afraid. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that they're necessarily afraid that it's going to explode without warning, you know. But there's always that possibility, and I wanted to leave that lingering in the poem, you know.
Yeah, I definitely, I love the visual. We have someone who wanting to ask a question in themselves. Please do so.
I guess that was me.
Hey, Matich.
Yeah. Okay, hello, Meg. First of all, congratulations. And it's wonderful to hear your poems. Now, I have a very specific question because I'm doing my first steps in writing in German, which is very similar to Icelandic in the wonderful ability of putting words together. And I think for anyone who is starting to try to write in a language like that is able to do that, that is one of the most poetic and most exciting things, that you can just put two words together and they work grammatically perfectly. So what I'm interested in is, when you started to write in Icelandic, did you have fun with coming up with your own composite words? And if you did, how did you manage to put that back into English? Because that's a very problematic part whenever one is trying to deal, especially with the very poetic compositor that one can come up with.
I just played around. I had no shame. I have no shame in Icelandic. I mean, maybe when I'm speaking sometimes, but as a writer, I feel less judgmental and less self-conscious whenever I'm writing in Icelandic. So when I'm playing around to make a word that wouldn't necessarily make sense to a native speaker, it doesn't feel as immense. You know, it's a learning experience. As for translating it back into English, sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I've been so happy with the poems in Icelandic that I didn't want to do that. I would just ask a translator to do that, who wasn't me. But it's also a process of riffing off of your own work too. I think that that's what auto translation is a lot of the time. It's rewriting the poems based on the bones of what they were.
Let me add something, May also add something, Meg, which is that there's this beautiful glossary at the end of this book, which we printed in letterpress in silver ink, in which you have several of these sorts of words. For example, you know, from Icelandic, I won't attempt to say the Icelandic word, but Arctic time, THYME, literally bloodstone, wind still is another one. It means windlessness, but derives from to lie down. So it was nice to see some of these sort of direct translations of Icelandic compound, you know, words coming in to the work as Icelandic words, but then coming in through a glossary, and your glossary is, you know, your own definitions of these words, which, you know, that's also sort of especially nice, because it's how you are thinking about them and applying them to the poems. So I wanted to add that, because just the fact of the book having this translational glossary where you're fascinated with these compounds tells me a lot about the language you're using.
We are getting a lot of questions in the chat. I'm hoping we can get through a couple more, because I'd be excited to hear some of the answers, but I'm going to go right ahead. So one of the questions we have is, could you speak a little bit more about landscape, especially how the Icelandic landscape has changed your work, if it has, particularly thinking about form and the visuals of the poem?
Okay. I think this is a really tough one. I haven't really thought of it. So in Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up, so I've lived in 3 very different landscapes. I've lived in southwestern Pennsylvania, New York City, and Iceland. So southwestern Pennsylvania, most of you will know, it's got trees and lakes and chirping frogs and fireflies, and everything is populated and alive all the time. Even in winter, it feels very much like it's vibrating with some sort of livingness that's just going to emerge in a couple of months. New York City, don't really need to explain that one, do I? And Iceland is just these, there are a lot of mountains. They're not very high mountains, so I think they're probably not as tall as the Appalachian Mountains. There are many of them, and they're kind of not as long as obviously not as long as the Appalachians, but they're not mountain chains necessarily. And then apart from those, you have a lot of lava fields. Sometimes the lava will be in these really nice pillows. I think they're called pillows. They're like these swirls, and they're covered in this 1,000-year-old moss. And you go out into the Icelandic countryside, you drive 20 minutes, and it's silent, and it's so silent you can hear the spaces around you. I think in the same way that maybe the students experience the whiteness on the pages, that emptiness becomes very beautifully loud, and it's like it wants to listen to you. You know, you're hearing it, but really it's hearing your body, because you're the presence that's interrupting it. You know, you're the letter on the page. I like that question.
I love that question too. Someone said it and just, oh, if you have time. I was like, no, this one's the next question. We have a question for the press, actually, so maybe we can give Meg a little breather, take a sip of water, something like that. And we have a question asking, what is the significance of the color red for the cover that we chose here?
I'll answer that. Although Elise, are you still here? Can chime in too. Elise Wells, where are you?
Yeah,
oh, there you are. So this was fun because at first we were like, well, obviously this book needs to be like a cold color. And pretty quickly the students began to sort of suggest, no, it cannot be this. You know, we were looking for, I guess, in the work, it is a very cold, the book really is aptly titled. There's a lot of imagery of cold landscapes. There's an icy sharpness to the poems, but there's also just this these extremes and this feeling of extremes. And so who was it, Elise? Did somebody come up with a red cover? Was it Ollie?
Ollie did a mock-up
in
a burgundy, and we felt that it was so powerful because just like Meg described the human element in the, you know, hearing the silence, that's how we felt that there was a pulse that was standing in the middle and witnessing this cold environment, but there was like this very human, vital, blood pulsing element that was witness to it all. So that's what we landed on, and I think it really worked.
Well, Ollie says I suggested it, but I don't think so. I think I was blown away to see a dark red cover, and there's blood in these poems, and there's lava, and there's, you know, they're quite red. So, but it's funny that, you know, as something in a class setting, when you are collaborating with a whole bunch of people, which is not necessarily how small press books usually come to be. Usually there's a designer who comes up with a design and everyone, you know, likes it or not. But this was a very large room of ideas. And so it was really a fun way to talk about the poems, because we talked about every little detail and what each decision might suggest to readers, or how it might resonate differently with the work. That's a great question, because it is quite bright red, which doesn't seem like it fits the title, but I think it's perfect.
I like that so much, that it's a witness and their blood is pumping and they're warm, and the cold is their experience, right? Not their body. I think that.
Apparently there was a lot of drama finding the paper too. They had to look for the exact right paper for the cover. So they really put a lot of time and care into it. So I think we have time for one more question. Do you think? Okay. So this question comes from Rachel. It's about the formulation of the poems. There was a number of instances, as you read, where there was the alliteration with the letter R. Can you speak to the playfulness involved with that, perhaps because particularly the American R can be quite unique, or about how you pull poetics like that in?
That's beautiful, and I don't know if I noticed that, Rachel. I have a lot of R's. R's are really nice. There are very, very many R's, as you know. Yeah, even Icelandic has a couple of R's too. German has an R, French has an R. I can't tell you why there are so many R's. Perhaps it's just pleasant to think in that letter. I thought that there were a lot of S's and U's and O's. O's are like these letters that you can really chew on. They make you feel a lot bigger. Or me, they do. Charcoal carved.
Meg, I'm interrupting your hearing and your speaking, but I would love it if you could read a couple more to close, and we can listen to them and how musical these poems are again before we stop. You don't have to stop now, but
now I've just got to find these R's. That's amazing.
So we can find them together.
I love that I'm alliterating something other than what I think is so obvious. I liked the W's, which was that one was intentional because I wanted to feel like the water was washing over somebody, and now can't stop doing it. Do you want to hear can I read you my friend's translation of one of them, of Gunnhildur's translation? So she did the whole poem, which is, here it's broken down into two poems individually called Settler. The other part of it that you didn't hear, there are a lot of R's in this too. I'm never going to stop seeing them now. Settler. 2 years of me scrubbed stone down to the frothy marrow. I worried into Genesis improbable pupae strung from the crown of a pecan tree. A strong root digs through lava fossils. The pecan trees, it's all improbable because a pecan tree can't grow here. Not much can grow here, but what does survive is actually very hardy. Like me. Sorry. This is Gunnhildur's translation. Landnemi. Ekki nema 2 ár af mér, skröppuðum steini niður í freyðandi merkin. Ég rótaði til lífsins fjarstæðu kenndu pikantri, gulnar púpur drúpa neðan úr krónunni. Gegnum steingervinga hreinsins grefur ramgað rót sig niður. And we have someone else sitting on. Cold. How can I know the mechanisms in a barometer as well as I know the argot of thieves? Astrohorologist. You chart the remnant of a supernova that exploded 931 years before you were born. A nebula outlives all measurement, all complications ticking in ordinary time, all the words ever used to describe God and awe. Impossible winds blow airlessly through Taurus. I also think I have an answer now about repeated letters. I've considered this now. When I'm writing, I think a lot in sound, and even when I'm translating, I read what I'm doing out loud to myself in the process and after the process. I also have to print things out so that I can hold them up while I read them, and then I stick them on the wall and forget about them for a little while. But when I'm moving from line to line, it's like I'm leaping on a tightrope. And sometimes I'm following an image, very often not. I'll be chasing after sounds, and that's how I'm able to keep moving the poem forward. And that's also something which happens in revision and jumping from one sound that I've latched onto to the next. And sometimes they have a bit of a Venn diagram like overlap. It'll start with an S, and then a U will be in this word. It becomes a U, and they kind of move like this. I hear poetry, which is something that was a little bit less present in Magnus's poems. His were very much images, and I found the sounds for them much later, but a lot of the English translations, the sound was injected into them almost, because his poems are very quiet and mine are very outspoken and somewhat, mumbly occasionally. Maybe do you want to hear another poem?
Yes, we're becoming it's getting past our hour. So I would love it if you could conclude on a poem. And Mallory's posted the link to pre-order the book. It's only an edition of 100, so it will be available after that, however, as an ebook. But it's a very beautiful and lovingly made chapbook. So I hope that you will consider ordering it. That's at the Eulalia Books catalog on our website.
Let me pull it up on my computer. It's the problem with printing things out all the time, is that you use them. Yeah, well, okay. I like this one. I think this is a nice one to end on. Widerruf. Wait. Through air and tendon, be resolute. The universe relies on gaps to steady its structure. White ground becomes a lamp in winter. You must know. You must know. You are alive as long as something cries out. Yes. I'm done. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. This has been a beautiful reading. It's been such an honor to see just how far the SVC community can reach, but how close it stays. It's been so exciting to see the students get so excited about your work and working with it, and getting to know you a little bit more. They really loved it. We ask if you want to be part of this community, that you follow us on social media at Eulalia Books, and sign up for our newsletter. We have a lot of really, really fun things coming up, some really amazing publications that we're excited coming down the hatch. And then, yeah, pre-order that book. It's going to be a beautiful little piece of artwork to hold in your hand, beautiful poems. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to see you all.